You've spent your entire life trying to make sense of things that were never meant to fit into words. You've sat in the silence of your own confusion, desperately searching for the right explanation, the perfect sentence, the logical reason that would finally help people understand why you're here, why you're stuck, why you're different, why your path looks nothing like theirs. And the truth you haven't wanted to face is this: you were never supposed to explain it, not to them, not even to yourself. Your life was not designed to be a presentation, a defense, or a testimony that satisfies the curiosity of people who were never invited into your story in the first place. But you've been doing it anyway. You've been living like your existence needs footnotes, like your decisions require a bibliography, like every season of silence must come with a press release. You've been performing an exhausting translation of your soul for an audience that doesn't even speak your language, and it's killing you. Because every time you try to explain why you left that relationship, why you walked away from that career, why you've been quiet for months, why you're not where you thought you'd be by now, you feel the weight of their judgment before you even finish the sentence. You see it in their eyes, the confusion, the doubt, the unspoken accusation that maybe you're just lost, maybe you're just making excuses, maybe you're just afraid. And so you try harder. You add more details. You justify the unjustifiable. You defend the indefensible. You turn your sacred process into a courtroom testimony, hoping that if you explain it well enough, they'll finally understand. But they never do. And the more you explain, the more you lose yourself in the translation. Because some things in life were never meant to be understood by people who haven't walked in your shoes, who haven't felt your pain, who haven't heard the voice that called you into the wilderness when everyone else was building in the city. You've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. The burden of clarity. The burden of making sense. The burden of being digestible to people who were only ever meant to witness your life, not narrate it. And that burden has kept you small. It's kept you stuck. It's kept you second-guessing every move, every choice, every instinct, because you're too busy wondering how it will sound when you have to explain it later. You're living for the explanation instead of living for the experience. You're editing your life in real time, cutting out the parts that don't translate well, the parts that sound crazy, the parts that make you look weak or confused or reckless. You've become a politician of your own existence, carefully crafting every statement, every decision, every emotion into something that won't offend, won't confuse, won't alienate the people whose approval you never needed in the first place. And the cost of that? The cost is you, the real you, the raw you. The you that feels things deeply, that hears things others don't hear, that sees things others don't see, that knows things without knowing how you know them. That version of you has been suffocated under the weight of explanation. You've silenced your instinct because it doesn't come with data. You've ignored your intuition because it doesn't come with logic. You've dismissed your calling because it doesn't come with a roadmap that makes sense to people who were never meant to walk it with you. And so you've stayed in places you've outgrown, stayed in relationships that drain you, stayed in versions of yourself that you know aren't true anymore. All because leaving would require an explanation you don't have. All because moving forward would look irresponsible to people who think responsibility means staying where you're comfortable. But here's what nobody tells you. The people demanding explanations from you, they're not asking because they care. They're asking because your movement makes them uncomfortable. Your courage exposes their complacency. Your willingness to walk into the unknown without a script makes them feel the weight of their own fear. And so they disguise their discomfort as concern. They frame their judgment as care. They ask you questions that sound like love but feel like interrogation. Where are you going? Why are you leaving? What's your plan? How will you survive? What if you're wrong? And every question is a seed of doubt they're planting in your mind, hoping you'll stay small enough to make them feel safe. Because if you can walk away without all the answers, if you can trust the process without understanding it, if you can live your life without needing their validation, what does that say about them? What does that say about the cage they've been calling home? You've been living in a prison of explanation, and the bars are made of other people's need for your life to make sense. But your life was never meant to make sense to them. It was only ever meant to make sense to you. And even that's optional, because some of the most powerful moments in life are the ones that defy logic, that break the rules, that refuse to fit into the neat little boxes we've been taught to live in. The moment you left everything behind and didn't know why. The moment you said no when everyone expected yes. The moment you chose yourself when it looked selfish. The moment you walked away when it looked weak. Those moments don't need explanations. They need obedience. They need trust. They need the kind of courage that moves without permission, without applause, without the safety net of other people's understanding. And the tragedy is this. You've wasted years of your life trying to translate the untranslatable. You've exhausted yourself trying to make people understand a journey they were never meant to join. You've dimmed your light trying to make it comfortable for people who are always going to judge you anyway. And in doing so, you've delayed your own becoming. You've postponed your own growth. You've put your destiny on hold because you were too busy defending your process to people who were never going to approve of it in the first place. You've been living for an audience that doesn't even have tickets to your show. And it's time to stop. It's time to release the need to be understood. It's time to let go of the exhausting performance of making your life make sense to people who were never meant to understand it. Because your life was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be lived. There is a seed buried in the soil right now, and it has no idea what's happening to it. It's surrounded by darkness, pressed on every side by the weight of the earth. And if it could speak, it would tell you it feels trapped, confused, maybe even abandoned. It doesn't understand why it's been buried. It doesn't understand why the light is gone. It doesn't understand the pressure, the breaking, the splitting of its shell. And here's the part that should change everything for you. The seed doesn't owe anyone an explanation for what's happening in the dark. The soil doesn't ask for a report. The rain doesn't demand a progress update. The sun doesn't require a testimony before it shines. The seed just submits to the process, trusts the violence of its own transformation, and pushes through the soil without ever understanding why. And when it finally breaks the surface, when it finally becomes the tree it was always meant to be, nobody asks it to explain the months it spent in the ground. They just enjoy the shade. You are that seed right now. And you've been trying to explain the darkness. You've been trying to make sense of the pressure. You've been trying to justify the breaking, the isolation, the confusion, the silence. But what if the darkness wasn't a mistake? What if the pressure wasn't punishment? What if the breaking wasn't failure? What if it was all preparation for something you can't even see yet? What if your life wasn't designed to be understood in real time, but to be trusted in real time? What if the season you're in right now, the one that makes no sense, the one you can't put into words, and the one that's alienated you from everyone who used to know you, what if that season is the most important one you'll ever live? Not because of what it looks like, but because of what it's producing in you. Because here's what they don't teach you. Confusion is not the absence of direction. Confusion is the presence of transformation. When a caterpillar enters the cocoon, it doesn't become a butterfly gradually. It doesn't grow wings while keeping its old form. No, it liquefies. It dissolves into complete chaos. Its entire structure breaks down into something unrecognizable. And if you could ask the caterpillar in that moment what's happening, it wouldn't have an answer. It's not becoming something. It's unbecoming everything. And that process doesn't come with clarity. It doesn't come with understanding. It comes with surrender. The caterpillar doesn't need to know it's becoming a butterfly. It just needs to trust the process that's destroying everything it used to be. And maybe that's where you are. Maybe you're in the liquefaction stage. Maybe everything you thought you were is dissolving. Maybe the identity you spent years building is falling apart. Maybe the plans you made are crumbling. Maybe the relationships you thought were permanent are ending. Maybe the version of yourself you showed the world is no longer true, and you've been trying to explain it. You've been trying to make it make sense. You've been trying to hold on to the old form while the new one is trying to emerge. But you can't do both. You can't become who you're meant to be while clinging to who you used to be. And you can't explain a process that's happening in a language your mind doesn't speak yet. There's a lion cub somewhere in the wild right now, and it's being trained by its mother in ways it doesn't understand. She's dragging it away from the pride. She's forcing it to hunt when it's not hungry. She's making it sleep alone when it's afraid. She's teaching it to roar when it feels silent. And the cub doesn't understand. It doesn't know why it's being isolated. It doesn't know why the training is so harsh. It doesn't know why it can't just stay comfortable, stay close, stay safe. But the mother knows something the cub doesn't. She knows that comfort kills lions. She knows that safety breeds weakness. She knows that the cub's survival depends on instincts it hasn't developed yet, strength it hasn't built yet, courage it hasn't discovered yet. And so she trains it in the wilderness. She trains it in the silence. She trains it in the isolation. Not because she doesn't love it, but because she does. And maybe that's what's happening to you. Maybe you're being trained for something you can't see yet. Maybe the isolation isn't rejection. Maybe the silence isn't abandonment. Maybe the confusion isn't punishment. Maybe it's preparation. Maybe you're being pulled away from the noise because the noise was keeping you weak. Maybe you're being stripped of distractions because the distractions were keeping you small. Maybe you're being forced into the unknown because the known was killing you slowly. And you don't need to explain that to anyone. You don't need to defend your season of withdrawal. You don't need to justify why you've been quiet, why you've been distant, why you've been different. You just need to trust that something in you is being sharpened, something in you is being built, something in you is being awakened that the old environment could never produce. Because here's the truth about growth. It doesn't happen in public. It doesn't happen in the spotlight. It doesn't happen with an audience. It happens in the soil. It happens in the dark. It happens in the silence. Forests don't grow loud. Mountains don't rise with applause. Rivers don't carve canyons while explaining their path. They just move. They just flow. They just become. And nobody demands an explanation because nature doesn't owe us one. Nature just obeys the design, trusts the process, and lets the results speak for themselves. And you are part of that same design. You are part of that same process. You are nature in human form. And you've been trying to live by rules that were never meant for you. You've been living by the rule that says everything must make sense before you move. But life doesn't work that way. Clarity is not a prerequisite for obedience. Understanding is not a requirement for trust. You don't need to see the whole staircase before you take the first step. You don't need to know the destination before you leave the starting point. You don't need to have all the answers before you say yes to the call. Because the call doesn't come with a manual. It comes with a whisper. And the whisper doesn't explain itself. It just invites. And you either trust it or you don't. You either move or you stay. You either become or you remain. And maybe the reason you've been stuck for so long is because you've been waiting for permission that's never coming. You've been waiting for clarity that only comes after you move. You've been waiting for people to understand a decision they were never meant to approve. You've been waiting for the fear to go away before you step forward. But fear doesn't go away. It just gets smaller as you get stronger. And you don't get stronger by waiting. You get stronger by walking, by moving, by choosing, by trusting the process, even when the process makes no sense. By releasing the need to explain yourself to people who were never meant to validate you. By accepting that some chapters of your life will only make sense in hindsight, and that's okay. By understanding that your life is not a puzzle other people need to solve. It's a masterpiece they need to witness. There's a potter working with clay right now, and the clay has no idea what's being made. The clay doesn't understand the pressure. It doesn't understand why it's being stretched, squeezed, shaped, spun. It doesn't understand the heat of the kiln, the fire that feels like destruction. And if the clay could speak, it would beg the potter to stop. It would ask for an explanation. It would demand to know why this is necessary. But the potter doesn't explain. The potter just works because the potter sees the final form. The potter knows the purpose. The potter understands that the pressure is not punishment, it's process. The heat is not harm, it's transformation. And the clay doesn't need to understand. The clay just needs to surrender because the potter's hands are wiser than the clay's resistance. And maybe you're the clay right now. Maybe you're under pressure you don't understand. Maybe you're in heat that feels unbearable. Maybe you're being shaped in ways that feel wrong, painful, destructive. And you've been demanding an explanation from the potter. You've been asking why, how long, what for. But what if the potter doesn't owe you an explanation? What if the potter just owes you a masterpiece? What if your job isn't to understand the process, but to trust the hands? What if your life was never meant to be explained, but to be surrendered? What if the greatest act of faith you could ever perform is to stop trying to make sense of everything and just let yourself be made into what you were always meant to become? Before I continue, answer one question honestly. How much of your life are you living for people who will never understand it anyway? How many decisions have you delayed? How many dreams have you buried? How many versions of yourself have you killed just to avoid the discomfort of not having an explanation that satisfies them? If you're still listening, something inside you is waking up. Something inside you is tired of performing. Something inside you is ready to stop defending your journey to people who were never qualified to judge it. And that something is about to set you free. Let me tell you about a man I once heard of, a craftsman who lived on the edge of a small village. For months, maybe even years, he disappeared into his workshop. The doors stayed closed. The windows stayed dark. People would walk by and wonder what he was doing in there, why he'd abandoned the community, why he wasn't contributing, why he wasn't visible. Some called him lazy. Some called him crazy. Some said he'd given up on life. His family knocked on the door, asking for explanations. His friends sent messages demanding updates. The village whispered about his isolation, his silence, his strange withdrawal from everything normal. And he never responded. He never defended himself. He never explained. He just kept working in the dark, sharpening something they couldn't see, perfecting something they couldn't understand, preparing something they weren't ready to witness. And then one day, he emerged. And in his hands was a sword so flawless, so precise, so perfectly balanced that every warrior who saw it knew immediately this man hadn't been wasting time. He'd been mastering time. He hadn't been hiding from life. He'd been preparing for it. And suddenly all the questions stopped. All the judgment evaporated. All the demands for explanation became irrelevant because the work spoke louder than any words ever could. You are that craftsman. And right now you're in the workshop. The doors are closed. The lights are off. And people are asking questions you don't have answers to. They want to know what you're doing, where you're going, why you're not like you used to be. And you've been feeling the pressure to come out, to show them something, to prove you're not wasting your life. But what if coming out too early ruins the work? What if revealing yourself before you're ready dilutes the power? What if the sword isn't finished yet and you're letting people see it half sharpened, half formed, half true? What if the greatest gift you could give yourself right now is the permission to stay in the dark a little longer, to keep working in silence, to stop performing for an audience that doesn't even know what you're building? There was a woman who spent years trying to explain her choices to her family. She left a career they were proud of. She ended a relationship they approved of. She moved to a city they didn't understand. And every time she tried to explain, it sounded weak. It sounded impulsive. It sounded like she was running from something instead of running towards something. And maybe she was. Maybe she didn't have the words yet. Maybe the clarity hadn't come yet. Maybe all she had was a whisper in her soul that said move, and she obeyed it even though it made no sense. Her mother cried. Her father stopped calling. Her friends drifted away. And for a while she wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She wondered if she should go back, apologize, explain herself better, make them understand. But something in her refused. Something in her knew that if she went back to make them comfortable, she'd lose herself forever. And so she stayed. She stayed in the unknown. She stayed in the unexplained. She stayed in the season that made no sense to anyone but her. And then, slowly, things started to shift. Doors opened that were never visible before. Opportunities appeared that didn't exist in the old life. Connections formed with people who understood her without explanation. And one day, she looked back and realized she didn't need them to understand. She just needed herself to obey. And here's what that woman learned, what the craftsman learned, what the seed and the lion and the clay all learned without knowing they were learning it. Your life is not a courtroom. You are not on trial. You don't owe anyone a closing argument. You don't need a jury of your peers to approve your next move. You don't need unanimous consensus before you change. You don't need permission from people who aren't living your life, feeling your pain, hearing your call. You need obedience. You need courage. You need trust. And none of those things come with explanations. They come with action. They come with movement. They come with the willingness to be misunderstood, misjudged, and even rejected by people who were never meant to walk with you into the next chapter. Because here's the hard truth. Not everyone gets to come with you. Not everyone is meant to understand. Not everyone will celebrate your growth. Some people are attached to the version of you that needed them. Some people are comfortable with the version of you that stayed small. Some people built their identity around being your guide, your savior, your advisor. And when you outgrow that version, when you no longer need their approval, when you start moving without their permission, it threatens them. It exposes them. It forces them to face their own stagnation. And so they resist. They question. They criticize. They demand explanations. Not because they care about your clarity, but because your movement is revealing their comfort. Your courage is exposing their fear. Your willingness to live unexplained is highlighting their need to stay safe. And you've been shrinking yourself to protect their feelings. You've been staying small to keep them comfortable. You've been living half your truth to avoid their discomfort. But what if their discomfort is not your responsibility? What if their confusion is not your problem? What if their inability to understand is not your burden to carry? What if you were never meant to make sense to them? What if you were only ever meant to make sense to the one who designed you, the one who called you, the one who sees the blueprint they'll never see? Lions don't explain their roar. They just roar. And the forest either respects it or it doesn't. Rivers don't explain their direction. They just flow. And the land either makes way or it gets carved. Mountains don't explain their height. They just rise. And the sky either holds them or it doesn't. And none of them apologize. None of them shrink. None of them pause their becoming to make sure everyone understands. They just obey the nature they were given. They just trust the design they were built with. They just become what they were always meant to become. And you are no different. You are a lion that's been whispering. You are a river that's been standing still. You are a mountain that's been apologizing for its height. And it's time to stop. It's time to stop living for the explanation. It's time to stop editing your life for people who were never meant to read it. It's time to stop defending your decisions to people who weren't there when the call came. It's time to stop performing your process for an audience that doesn't even understand the language you're speaking. Because your life was never meant to be a translation. It was meant to be an expression. It was meant to be a roar. It was meant to be a flow. It was meant to be a rise. And the only person who needs to understand it is you. And even that's optional. Because sometimes the most powerful way to live is to move without understanding, to trust without clarity, to obey without explanation, to just say yes to the whisper and let the results speak for themselves. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them a timeline. You don't owe them a reason that makes sense in their world. You don't owe them comfort. You don't owe them predictability. You don't owe them a version of yourself that they can understand, control, or approve. You only owe yourself the truth. And the truth is this. You've been living in a cage built from other people's questions. You've been shrinking to fit into boxes they label for you. You've been dimming your light to make them feel safe in their darkness. And every day you spend trying to make your life make sense to people who were never meant to understand it is another day you delay your destiny. Another day you postpone your purpose. Another day you reject the call that's been whispering your name since before you knew your own voice. There is a version of you on the other side of this silence, on the other side of this season, on the other side of this surrender. And that version doesn't ask for permission. That version doesn't wait for applause. That version doesn't need validation from people who never had the courage to walk their own path. That version just moves, just trusts, just becomes. And that version is waiting for you to stop explaining and start living. That version is waiting for you to release the weight of other people's confusion and pick up the mantle of your own calling. That version is waiting for you to stop translating your soul into a language that was never meant to contain it. Because your life is not a presentation. It's not a proposal. It's not a pitch that needs approval from a boardroom of people who've never risked anything. Your life is a mystery. And mysteries are not meant to be solved. They're meant to be lived. They're meant to be experienced. They're meant to be walked into with trembling hands and a pounding heart and absolutely no guarantees. They're meant to be trusted even when every logical part of you is screaming to turn back. Even when everyone around you is calling you reckless, irresponsible, foolish. Even when you can't explain it, especially when you can't explain it. You've wasted years trying to package your mess into something clean, trying to turn your chaos into something acceptable, trying to make your wilderness journey sound like a strategic plan. But what if the mess is the message? What if the chaos is the curriculum? What if the wilderness is not where you got lost, but where you got found? What if every unexplainable detour, every confusing delay, every painful redirection was not a mistake, but a masterpiece being painted by hands you couldn't see? What if your job was never to understand it, but to surrender to it? What if the greatest act of faith you could ever perform is to stop demanding answers and start trusting the process that refuses to explain itself? Rivers don't stop to explain why they turn, they just carve canyons. Storms don't apologize for their direction. They just reshape the landscape. Seasons don't defend their timing. They just change everything in their path. And you are no different. You are a force of nature wrapped in human skin. You are a river that's been apologizing for its current. You are a storm that's been asking permission to rain. You are a season that's been justifying its arrival, and it's time to stop. It's time to stop living like your existence needs a defense attorney. It's time to stop treating your life like a crime that needs to be explained to a jury of people who were never qualified to judge it. The people who are meant to walk with you won't need an explanation. They'll just feel it. They'll see you moving and something in them will recognize the call. They'll watch you walking into the unknown, and instead of asking why, they'll ask how they can follow. They'll witness your courage and it will activate their own. But the people who demand explanations before they respect you, the people who need your journey to make sense before they support you, the people who require proof before they believe in you, those people were never your tribe. They were your test. And you've been failing it by shrinking, by explaining, by defending, by trying to make them comfortable with a journey that was always meant to make them uncomfortable. Because your growth exposes their stagnation. Your movement reveals their paralysis. Your willingness to live unexplained highlights their addiction to safety. And they will resist you. They will question you. They will call your faith foolishness and your courage recklessness. And you have to let them. You have to release them. You have to bless them from a distance and keep moving. Because if you stop to convince them, you'll never arrive. If you pause to explain, you'll miss the moment. If you shrink to keep them close, you'll lose yourself completely. There is a roar inside you that's been reduced to a whisper. There is a river inside you that's been dammed by doubt. There is a mountain inside you that's been hidden by humility. that was never really humility. It was fear dressed as politeness. And it's time to let it out. It's time to stop apologizing for taking up space. It's time to stop explaining why you deserve to be here. It's time to stop justifying your existence to people who never had to justify theirs. You are here. You are alive. You are called. And that is enough. That has always been enough. And it will always be enough. So stop waiting for everything to make sense. Stop waiting for the perfect explanation. Stop waiting for people to understand before you move. Stop waiting for permission that's never coming. Stop waiting for clarity that only arrives after obedience. Just move. Just trust. Just become. Because your life was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be lived. And the world doesn't need another person who can articulate their journey perfectly. The world needs someone who will walk it anyway. Someone who will trust it anyway. Someone who will become anyway. Even when it makes no sense. Even when nobody understands. Even when the only voice that believes in you is the whisper in your soul that refuses to be silenced. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you want more messages that grow your soul, subscribe, because your journey has just begun.